I don't want no oil, a spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
And together we are crafting that amazing hour of radio called For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about the ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in terms of your health, your wealth, your happiness, and the happiness and health of your family and friends and pets. And we try to do it with some humor, and I think we try to keep it interesting and keep it kind of light, but still getting a lot of information across. We've got and I want to start out by saying, as for the past several weeks, we're doing the show from our homes today. And normally when we go into the studio, that it's that nice big studio, and I like to go up to the second floor where they have the library, and then because then you can prepare for the show, and sometimes you're there in the study carols, and this time of year, Phil, the librarian, likes to put, bouquets of lilacs out on the tables. And so you're just sitting there and you're just thinking, wow, this is really an amazing thing we're doing here. And it's harder to get that sense when you're in your own home, sitting in your living room. So I've been dressing up. I'm still in my suit, but unfortunately I've run out of suits. I've gone all through my wardrobe. So now you're just going to have to settle for my nice ties. Today I'm in my space shuttle tie that I got when I went down and visited NASA some years ago. And if you watch the show on YouTube, you can actually see it. I've gotten a lot of compliments on this tie. But here we are, ready to go with a fantastic show lined up. We have a special guest who's going to be joining us in about 10 minutes. His name is Andrew Tobias. And he is a reporter for Cleveland.com. Well, Rebecca, I'm hearing a little background noise there. I'm not sure.
The door keeps coming open.
Oh. Okay.
I had to get up and close it twice.
All right. Well, so Andrew's going to be talking to us about a very important story for Ohio. It's one that's taking money directly out of your pocket and giving it directly to some very dishonest political actors. I mean, literally just taking money from you and giving it over to these people that are distorting the political process in Ohio and hurting the environment in the process. And that's why we're talking about it on For a Green Future. But that's in a few minutes. Right now, I just wanted to chat a little bit. It just so happens that yesterday was my birthday. Yes, 58 years old / young. And,
Yay!
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, it was a very nice birthday. I had a great time. I actually have this rather, I guess you could call it juvenile habit or hobby that I indulged myself in yesterday. I like to shoot off model rockets. But, when you're a kid, you shoot off the little rockets. And I do have a couple of those. I shot off a couple of those yesterday. But I also, as an adult, I can make, really big model rockets. So I have this 4-foot long model rocket that I had a huge engine in, and it was lots of fun. We had just if I've ever watched people shooting off model rockets, that it's always sort of a mix of success and failure and danger and adrenaline and improvisation. It was great. We had a great time. But while I was out, we were seeing lots and lots of people without masks, without wearing protection. Everybody who came to watch the rocket launch had a mask, which was very nice. But I wanted to take a minute because there's a ton of disinformation being put out there right now about these masks. And first of all, I want to say I worked for over a decade as a machinist in a industrial ceramics factory, and I had to wear an N95 mask for upwards of 8 hours a day. And I have to tell you that some of the stuff that's being passed around on social media, this idea, you're breathing your own CO2, is just completely false. It's hogwash. You're not.
Also, you're not supposed to, unless you're actually working in ER, you're not supposed to wear N95 masks anyway. Those are for medical professionals. The ones that everybody else are wearing are not N95 masks. They're just little pieces of fabric.
Yeah, and I have some paper masks that we actually had them back before the whole COVID thing hit. We had a couple boxes of them. So, So masks, you will not be harmed by breathing, quote unquote, breathing your own CO2 from wearing a mask. I never was. And I like I say, I wore them 8 hours a day, and it wasn't as if I was, I had a very physical job. I was constantly lifting these 55-pound sacks of grain, we called it, which was really fused silica powders, and dumping them into mixers. And, I had to work hard while wearing a mask, and I never once passed out or died. I never died doing that. And, I think my presence here is proof of that. So
I don't know. Actually, the big secret, Russell and I are currently holding a seance because you died a long time ago from N95 masks.
Well, nobody told me that it hasn't affected my lifestyle at all. So I'm going to stick with my position.
You're a very lively dead guy.
So, thank you. Thank you, Rebecca. So if we all wear masks, many of us will avoid dying because we won't be passing this disease back and forth. And it's just that it really burns me up that people are putting out this information which will hurt you, because if you go out without masks and you catch COVID, you have a good chance of becoming very seriously ill and a higher than percent chance than you would like of actually dying from it. So, or passing it on to someone who would then die from it. So don't listen to these naysayers. Wear your mask when you go out. Trust me, wearing a mask is not going to kill you. We have our guest will be calling in shortly, but I just wanted to say that this whole thing against masks is part of a larger battle against science itself, against facts themselves. People are asserting their quote-unquote right to believe whatever they want, which you do have. You can believe anything you want. But if you refuse to believe science, if you refuse to believe things that have been established as facts, you could believe the opposite, but having that false belief can really hurt you, really cause you problems. And if your false beliefs, if your beliefs in opposition to fact get put into law and public policy, which is happening more and more often these days, then those false beliefs can hurt all of us. And it's just kind of amazing to me in this day and age that we have to tell people about communicable diseases, something we've known about for hundreds of years now. They've learned about the bubonic plague and rats and fleas. So this is all part of it's a political strategy, because if people can get you to disbelieve the most basic facts, the most basic science, then they can fill your head with whatever they want to put there. So don't listen to them. Don't let a meme on a social media prevent you from protecting yourself and your family and protecting your health and your happiness. Wear your mask and encourage everyone around you to wear your mask. Yeah, I just wanted to get that out there. Speaking of things that need to get out there, one thing, if you're a regular listener to the show, you'll know that all through 2019, we were following the whole House Bill 6 debacle, the law that got passed that takes direct charges from every Ohioan and every business in Ohio and gives them to First Energy, which is now First Energy Harbor, to support their nuke plants, which is why we opposed it. It also goes to support 2 coal plants. And one of the criticisms that was said at the time of the law was that there were no restrictions on this money. First Energy, now Energy Harbor, said they needed the money to keep their nuke plants going and to keep people employed, but nothing in this bill said they had to use the money for that purpose. And so one of the criticisms of the bill was that they might just take this money and just put it straight in their pockets, because there's nothing in the law that stops them. So it was widely reported on, and pretty much every editorial board in the state was opposed to HB6. And so as a HB6 update, as a follow-up, I came across an article on Cleveland.com by Andrew Tobias about what Energy Harbor is actually doing right now financially. And so that's why we've invited him on the show. And Andrew, are you there?
I am here.
Great. Hi, Andrew. Welcome to For a Green Future.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Okay, well, let's start, Andrew, with just the basics. If you could just give us your name and your title and who you work for and so forth.
Yeah, sure. My name's Andrew Tobias, and I am a State House reporter for Cleveland.com, also represent the Plain Dealer. My articles appear both online and in the newspaper in Cleveland. And I came onto covering House Bill 6 because part of my assignment is to cover sort of political influence and campaign contributions. And it also just was the biggest story in the State House last year, so I kind of came at it from a few different angles. But I've been down here in Columbus for about a year now covering stuff like that.
Wow, that's great. And so is that how long you've been a reporter?
Yeah, I've been a reporter for about 12 years. Ever since I graduated in 2008, basically. And I've actually been with Cleveland.com for about, 5 or 6 years. I just did transfer to the State House Bureau last year, so I was doing kind of local government and some state political coverage prior to that. But, I got into journalism, basically got involved with my college newspaper. I went to Otterbein, which is in the suburbs of Columbus, and just kind of ended up, drifting towards politics and government and stuff like that, and so I've been doing it ever since.
Oh, that's cool. So what made you decide to go into journalism?
Honestly, it was just that I enjoyed writing, and I had some college professors suggest that I give it a shot, and so I know that with my colleagues, sometimes there are people who knew exactly what they wanted to do, and particularly in political journalism, they studied political science and stuff like that. But for me, I enjoyed writing, and then the kind of other part that I really enjoy about it is that in journalism specifically, you get the opportunity to learn about different stuff and just do something different every day and really kind of engage with the world in a way that maybe you don't if you just sort of live, like in one narrow slice of it and stuff like that. So always something I enjoy doing, and it's something that I've enjoyed to continue to do.
House Bill 6 certainly was something out of the ordinary. I mean, it really, I've never seen an issue sort of galvanize everyone in the state the way this one did. But actually, so why don't you, if you could you just give us a sort of a synopsis of the story you recently filed about Energy Harbor doing stock buyback?
So earlier this week, I reported that Energy Harbor increased the amount of share buybacks that they're authorized to conduct from $500 million to $800 million. And a share buyback, generally, people think about it as a very large publicly traded company buying shares of their own stock back so that the remaining shares that are in sort of general ownership are worth more as a result because there's fewer of them. And it's something that a lot of companies do. It can be controversial. It's something that people have debated a lot. But in this case, what's kind of different about it is that Energy Harbor has a very few kind of narrowly held owners. And so in this case, and my story didn't really get into this a whole lot, but it seems that because they basically have two large investment firms that own about 80% of the company, and those companies before First Energy got spun off, before Energy Harbor got spun off from First Energy, were major bondholders of First Energy's, where basically they lent them a bunch of money. And so I think that in this case, Energy Harbor, by saying that we're going to buy $800 million worth of stock, they're basically buying out shares from these big companies that previously had invested in First Energy and now basically are giving them an avenue to cash out. And so kind of the controversy of all of that is that the idea that they're able to do this, that they have $800 million to spend buying out their owners, is that they are guaranteed money from House Bill 6 when it kicks in next year. That kind of guarantees their future cash flow so that they emerge from the bankruptcy proceeding with a bunch of money that was part of the process of spinning off from First Energy. So they say, well, we've got all this money now. We're going to have more money in the future, so why don't we consolidate our ownership? And in this case, maybe, too, they're giving their owners a chance to sort of, I guess, cash out to some degree.
With the assurance of $1 billion getting taken from the ratepayers, all our listeners, basically, they're able to spend $800 million. Basically, just when you say cash out, that essentially just means it goes into their pockets. They get the cash.
Yeah, they're giving money to their shareholders. Yeah.
Yeah, we here at For a Green Future, we spent a lot of time covering HB6 last year. In fact, we had an HB6 update every week until it passed. We posted on environmental grounds, but safe to say we weren't the only ones who opposed it. Wasn't there a broad opposition to House Bill 6 in Ohio?
Yeah, so part of the opposition were environmentalists, but other groups included manufacturers who are concerned that the subsidy, kind of like the tack-on charge to people's electricity bills, would make their own expenses go up. There were fiscal conservative groups that just kind of don't like the idea of government getting involved with the free market. And then, like you guys, there were environmentalists who, part of the structure of it was they defunded money that had been set aside for renewable energy projects. So that was kind of some of the basis for that, too. So I will say that it was very widely covered, but I don't think it was generally that well understood because not a lot of people sit around always thinking about kind of how their what their electricity bills say and what's in them and kind of what goes into all of that and stuff like that. But it was pretty remarkable that the coalition that was opposed to them was so diverse.
Right, and I could tell you, because I was there for a lot of them, the testimony in front of the House and the Senate on this, the Ohio House and Ohio Senate, 9 out of 10 organizations, individuals, companies were in opposition to it, and pretty much the only entities that spoke in favor of it were entities that were directly going to either receive the money directly or, be that first in line to get the contracts once the money was allocated. Except, of course, now we're learning that one of the criticisms of this bill from fiscal conservative groups was without the restrictions, it could be used for almost anything, and it could, in fact, be simply returned to the shareholders. And it kind of looks like that one of that's happening. Wasn't one of the criticisms at the time that since the money was unrestricted, it could be used for things like stock buybacks instead of retaining.
Yeah, right. And I don't specifically remember stock buybacks coming up, although I'm not saying that wasn't the case. But that was certainly one of the lines of criticism, was that there are no restrictions that were placed on the money. And so one of the things that kind of that people tried to get inserted in the bill who were concerned about just kind of how it was going to go was they tried to incorporate an auditing component to it, where basically there'd have to be basically a government review, or at least a third-party review of their finances to make sure that they were in need of the subsidy, and that just never happened. So that is definitely something that came up at the time.
Yeah, and it's interesting that there's utilities in Pennsylvania pushing for a buyback right now, pushing for a bailout right now, and the same thing is coming up. People are saying, you know, prove to us that you need this bailout. You know, usually you consider bailing people out when they're in some kind of trouble, but the criticism in Pennsylvania is very similar to what the criticism last year, that the utilities simply aren't opening up about their finances, and so there's no way to know if they actually need the money or not. So this pattern of buybacks around the nation, Ohio's wasn't the first buyback, and if the utilities have their way, it won't be the last, but literally these bailouts seem to be just take some more money from the consumers. It's it's a big thing, and we fought it, you know, and I fought it in my role as political director of the Ohio Green Party, but of course this show, it doesn't represent the Green Party. We're all just representing ourselves, and our listeners represent themselves too when they call in at 866-240-1065. Please, you can call in at any time and let us know, what do you think about this? Are you shocked and amazed, or is it business as usual, or just let us know what you thought about the whole HB6 thing at 866-240-1065. This is the best show in Ohio, but it does get better every time you call. Andrew, our show is based in Northwest Ohio, but our signal reaches all the way to Sandusky, and we like to keep abreast of the environmental news all over the state. Are there any interesting or hot environmental stories that you or your paper might be covering over there in Northeast Ohio, based, you know, out in the Cleveland area?
Yeah, well, so of course things have kind of cooled off as far as just the amount of attention that the whole coronavirus story is dedicating, that we have dedicated towards that. But like you guys, Lake Erie is very important to Cleveland, and, you know, we're concerned about water quality issues, and that we don't want to see the algal bloom issue that you guys dealt with affecting us. I mean, similarly, you know, Cleveland gets all of its drinking water from Lake Erie, and it's an important source of recreation, all the same stuff that it is for you guys. So that is definitely a concern. And then kind of, but more of, as opposed to agricultural runoff, you generally will hear more about managing combined sewer overflow and stormwater runoff and stuff like that. And then I guess another issue or story that comes to mind is, and I don't know if this fits the bill exactly, but there's been a long-standing effort where there's been a group that's been trying to build wind turbines off of the shore, and it would be, I think it would be a first for actual kind of offshore freshwater wind farm, basically. And that's gotten, you know, opposition from people who don't want to see it, or to some degree, probably competitors in the electrical industry. But so those are two stories that come to mind for me as being environmental stories that we've been following over the years recently.
Yeah, we actually had one of the principals involved in that on the show just about last March, I think. Windustrious, I guess they call it. Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma, but I think that, you know, as long as you take precautions with wind farms, like shut them down during peak migration times, which wind farms are perfectly capable of doing, the environmental impact would be very minimal. I mean, it's, for wind turbines, it's one bird per turbine per year, and, you know, people might not like to see wind turbines, but on the other hand, some of us think they're beautiful. You've got a huge wind turbine right there in the city of Cleveland, don't you? It's one of the biggest in the country, actually. It's that 3.1 megawatt turbine. Are you familiar with the one I'm talking about?
I've seen it. Yeah, I'm not super knowledgeable about the megawatts and all that stuff, but yes, you're right.
Yeah, it's one of the biggest in the country, and it's right there. If you're going on 90, you can just look over and see it. And it's kind of interesting. I always pointed out to my wife, there's that huge one, and then there's two littler, smaller ones a little further along. And basically I call them toys because since the amount of power on the wind is the square of the area, a big wind turbine produces much, much more power than smaller turbines. And so, we can have fewer, larger turbines and produce tons more power. And Cleveland's been doing it. That turbine's been producing, I think that's been up almost a decade now. And, you could live with them. There's one right there in the city of Cleveland. So, yeah. All right. Well, thanks very much, Andrew, for joining us today. Can I just ask you, how can people follow more of your reporting if they're interested?
So the best way to find what I'm up to is we have a daily political newsletter called Capitol Letter, and it's Capitol with an O, kind of like the state capitol building. And it basically compiles the work that I and my colleagues do. I see what you did there
with that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I see what you did there with that little pun. Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
We're brilliant. But my colleagues and I, it compiles what we do every day, and we kind of cover the goings-on in the State House, state politics, some federal politics too. And then there's also the compilation of some of the other best reporting from around the state. So I'm on Twitter. You can find me on Cleveland.com or in the Plain Dealer. But yeah, that's kind of a general rundown.
What's your Twitter name?
Oh yeah, it's just at Andrew J. Tobias. Actually, yeah, Andrew J. Tobias. There's another Andrew Tobias that I learned about immediately after my family got the internet. So when I plugged in AndrewTobias.com, I was disappointed somebody else already registered it. But yeah, Andrew J. Tobias.
Andrew J. Tobias. All right. Well, thanks so much, Andrew, for having us on. And we appreciate good reporting here at For a Green Future, and just want to thank you for bringing this story to everybody's attention, because I think that when it was done and everybody was making these claims that, the monies could be used for this and that, and I think it's important to follow up on people on these people and corporations and see what they actually do instead of what they promise they're going to do. So really appreciate it, Andrew.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me on, and we're going to continue to follow the story.
All right, wonderful. That was Andrew J. Tobias with Cleveland.com. Oh, but before we go to the news, so what do you think of this story, Rebecca?
Wow,
what did you think when you heard this?
So we warned people that there were no restrictions on how they could spend the money. They don't have to put it into the plant, which needs a lot of repairs. So we were like, well, what if they just give it straight to their stockholders? And it looks like that's kind of what they did.
That's how it looks. That's how it looks to me. And some of, I'm really embarrassed to say, I'm down here in Bowling Green, and some of my representatives in Columbus, Haraz Gambari is my House representative, and Teresa Gavarone is my state senator. They were among the most rabid pushers of this bill, of House Bill 6, and they used, every excuse, and they said, oh, no, they're not just going to pocket the money. That's crazy. And it sure looks like that might be what they're doing. So,
yeah,
definitely. I have to say I was not represented, and the majority of people in the district weren't represented because, as I said, everybody who knew about this bill opposed it. It was kind of amazing, and here we go. They just basically used the law to steal money from you. And now they're sort of dividing up the loot. That's kind of what it looks like has happened here.
Yeah, this is what a lot of my communist friends keep saying, is that instead of calling them bailouts, why don't we just call it stealing the taxpayers' money? And in a great many cases, maybe all of them, that seems apropos.
Yeah, stealing taxpayer money, bill number 6. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how popular that would be, but
yeah,
the way things go today, it might still get enough votes to pass. I don't know.
No kidding. It's not a smooth marketing move, basically, but it's pretty accurate.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh well, that is one funny thing about that whole HB6. Just to remind everybody, in terms of marketing, it was an absolute disaster. I mean, the techniques they tried to use to convince all of us it was a good idea to just let them steal money from us. Oh, the advertising and so forth, it was some of the worst I've ever seen. And it really failed. I mean, when it passed, it was opposed by 80% of Ohioans in the polling at the time.
Well, give them some credit,
failed.
Joe. I mean, to be fair, that was a hard thing to spin. It was a challenge for the marketers.
Yeah, you're right. That would be one of those mixed blessings.
What would you have done? Come on. What are you?
Contrast. What would I have done? I think I might have. I think I would have. I wouldn't have taken the job. I'm sorry. Which is
told
one
them to
reason I'm
bugger
not
off.
in
Yes.
Yeah. I would have said, "Hey, get out of here. I don't want to pay extra money. I'm not going to convince my family to do it either." So.
Well, that's why you're not in advertising.
Yep, that explains that career decision. All right. Well, anyway, so on to some good news. It's time for some eco news, and it is mostly good this week. I managed to find several really upbeat stories. One, the Williams Pipeline in New York State has been stopped. The New York Department of Environmental Conservation, the DEC, there was a application for a $2 billion pipeline that would have brought fracked gas from Pennsylvania across New York State, and actually it was going to go to New York City Harbor. So,
oh boy.
Yeah, so a nice big pipeline, and then of course once it gets to New York City, out to the rest of the world, and mostly China and so forth. But so again, the U.S. being used like a third world country, just being exploited for our resources. And, a lot of this fracked gas isn't even going to benefit Ohioans. I mean, like the Nexus pipeline that goes through Wood County here, all that gas coming from southern Ohio is going out to Canada and then getting shipped off to Asia. So, but they stopped it. It was a huge grassroots effort, tons of people involved, and finally the DEC denied this final essential permit, and so no Williams pipeline. So we beat one, which is
so. At what point, Joe, do we admit that we have become a third world country? Because I've been thinking about this lately. When do we figure that the tipping point has been reached there?
Well, that's a good question, Rebecca.
Thank you.
If any of our listeners want to chime in at 866-240-1065, we'd be happy to hear your opinion. But the third world country, I mean, we have somebody who's trying to reverse environmental laws by dictate. Trump is acting like a third world dictator, third world leader, in trying to allow the exploitation of our forests and our resources by the big corporations without any public input or environmental controls. So I guess right now organizations like the Center for Biological Diversity manage to stop him like 9 out of 10 times, because mostly what he's trying to do is illegal, and the courts are saying, look, that's illegal. You can't do that. You're breaking environmental laws. I guess if we get, and I'm not saying we should, and I'm not putting any energy into making this happen, but if we get to the point where the courts agree with the proposed dictation, with the proposed dictator proclamations that are illegal, obviously illegal, but if the courts start agreeing with that, I'd say that's when we cross the line. When that last barrier of democracy, really, because these laws are put in place democratically. So if they're allowed by the courts to be broken, that's when we would cross the line, and we'd have to just say, okay, now we're a third world country. We've gone from first world to third world. But,
that makes sense.
That's my opinion. What do you think?
Okay, well, there's third world and then there's a dictatorship. Is it possible to have a first world dictatorship? A lot of people seem to feel in this country like we're not, we have problems, we're not prosperous enough, we need a stronger daddy, basically. But a guy who doesn't have to consult the people and can do whatever he wants, you really think he's going to do what's in your best interest? That's not the way history writes it.
Well, Germany tried a first world dictatorship. It didn't end well for that country.
No.
So I wouldn't recommend it.
It was good in the early stages, but
yeah. But yeah, it created a lot of
economically speaking, it was
economic prosperity, but
yeah,
it's not worth
for a
the
minute.
trade-off.
It was kind of a bubble.
Big bubble. So anyway,
popped
more
nastily.
eco news. Yeah, going back to some more good news.
There we go.
Monsanto. You may remember about a year ago, Monsanto lost a $2 billion lawsuit because it turned out that Roundup pesticides, which they had claimed for decades was safe, actually causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Oopsie.
Well, there's a related story, and they just suffered another loss. This one, $265 million. Not so hard, except it opens the door for a lot of other farmers to sue. There was a farmer in Missouri who sued Monsanto because they have genetically modified some crops to fight or to be resistant to a pesticide or an herbicide called dicamba. Okay, so they genetically modify these crops. They can resist dicamba, so then they can just spray the heck out of the fields with dicamba. Then they can grow their genetically modified crop. Well, what happens is that drift from dicamba drifts over into the fields of other farmers, and it kills all their plants because they don't have the dicamba-resistant plants. And so this farmer sued and finally won. And one of the reasons he won is that he was able to get a hold of internal Monsanto documents where basically they had planned to do this. They planned to create, in the words of the lawsuit, and this is actually in the lawsuit, Monsanto conspired to create ecological disaster because they knew that their dicamba pesticides would drift and kill everything outside of their genetically modified fields. And what they said is this is actually great because this will force those other farmers to also buy our genetically modified crops. Because otherwise all their plants will die.
Right.
And so they saw that as they saw killing everything as a win-win for them. And so it was a big thing. And of course, the ecological principle here, one reason they're turning to this dicamba is because Monsanto's Roundup-ready genetically modified organisms allowed them to kill off everything with Roundup, but then the weeds have become resistant to Roundup, just as we ecologists said they would 20 years ago when they introduced this whole insane scheme of genetically modifying plants to resist herbicides. We said this will only work in a short term, and then the weeds will become resistant, and then they will be super resistant, and you'll be unable to control them with your herbicides anymore. Because that's a basic ecological principle. It's natural selection. It's going to happen evolutionarily. And they went ahead and did it anyway. And now, just as we predicted, Roundup is no longer effective against many, many weeds. And so now they want to pull exactly the same scam again with dicamba. And hopefully what's happened here, because they lost this lawsuit early on, and because their plan to create ecological disaster got exposed early on, hopefully we have stopped them before the same thing happens with dicamba that has happened with Roundup. Because
your lips to God's ears.
Yeah. And at least part of what's happening is they're getting hit with the bill up front. $265 million, a big multinational corporation can absorb that, but hey, $100 million here, $100 million there, it starts to add up to real money. And as I say, now there's a whole slew of farmers whose crops and fields have literally been ruined by this drifting dicamba, and now they can all point back to this lawsuit and say, yeah, not only did Monsanto destroy my living, but they knew they were going to do it, and they planned to do it, and they wanted to make money off of doing it. So this actually, here's your test, Rebecca. I mean, the first world, third world thing. In a third world country, lawsuits like this just get tossed out, and nobody, the big corporation never has to pay, and they just get away with it because the people in those countries, the farmers and the local people that get hurt, don't have enough political power to challenge these big corporations. So,
because their masters live elsewhere.
Yeah. So here's your test, Rebecca. We'll see if this judgment stands. Monsanto has said, we're going to fight this and we're going to appeal it, and they're going to try to get it knocked down to a couple 100,000 or whatever. So this is your test, third world or first world. And it's very interesting that our farmers are the ones on the front line of this battle, and they're the ones that are going to basically see if the rule of law in the U.S. can still be defended. So, but the good news is that Monsanto lost the battle. Right now, there's a $265 million judgment against them, and if word of this gets out, maybe they'll just pay the fine. Maybe they'll give up on this insane. This is one of those insane supervillain plans that they have in comic books. I'll destroy the Americas. I'll destroy the croplands and everyone's ability to grow food unless they come to me. You expect some guy in a cape to be somewhere behind all this stuff in a mask, but
real villains don't always wear capes.
Yeah, too bad.
To paraphrase a popular saying.
Yeah. So anyway, that's good news, and we'll see what happens with that. So we had the pipeline stopped. We had the Monsanto getting dinged for $265 million. One piece of news I wanted to pass on, and if people want to do something for the environment this week, if you feel like taking some sort of action, there is right now there's a controversy. The federal EPA wants to get rid of what's called the nuisance provision in Ohio law, and it's kind of complex. And so if this interests you, go and find out more information yourself. But the nuisance provision basically says that if you are living near a polluter, let's say it's a pipeline or a smokestack, and they are hurting you, they're polluting you, you've got asthma, and the EPA, the Ohio EPA or the local authorities aren't enforcing the regulations that are supposed to protect you from that pollution, you as an Ohioan are allowed to take them to court and say, look, you're violating the law, you're killing my family, stop and, pay us some damages. It's called the nuisance provision. Well, Trump's EPA wants to get rid of that, and it's kind of interesting that we have, once upon a time, conservatives like to talk about states' rights. And here we have a state, Ohio, and we have this nuisance provision. This is a state law. And so Trump, through the federal EPA, wants to say, you can't do that. This is literally just eliminating states' rights. So the thing is, there's comments, it's an open comment period. But the comments are only accepted until May 22nd. That's the deadline to comment to the EPA. So if you want to comment on this, you have to go to the EPA's website, or you can go to Ohio Citizen Action. They have some things on this, and Sierra Club does too. But this one is one that's kind of sneaking under the radar, I think, because it's a little harder to explain, and most people don't know about the nuisance provision. It's not being used nearly enough because most people don't even know it exists. And so these corporations are trying to, through the federal government, are trying to get rid of it before people realize that they have a recourse. They have a recourse beyond just depending on the understaffed local authorities to enforce environmental laws. So, all right, that's the main news I wanted to get. I do want to mention one more thing. Furby 2, you may have seen in the paper that Furby 2 is down for refueling right now. And it made the paper, though, because the people who are doing the refueling are catching COVID at an incredible rate. We've talked about this before on the show. When you're refueling a nuclear plant, you often have to work cheek to jowl. It's kind of like working in a meat packing plant sometimes. You know, you're right up against people lifting heavy things, turning valves. What happens is, we actually reported on the story that workers there were concerned that they were being put into situations where they weren't being protected from COVID, and now they're catching COVID in huge numbers. We don't know the exact numbers because they refuse to tell us. But one thing that happened this past week, the owners of Fermi 2, Detroit Energy, asked the NRC for exemption from laws that govern how long people can work and how many hours they could put in while running a nuclear plant because of the COVID staffing shortages, because people are getting sick and dying, but they want to keep the nuke running. And, of course, the NRC approved it the same day. They say, oh, sure. So now, as they try to restart the refueled reactor, which is the most complicated, most dangerous time at a nuclear power plant, that's when things typically go wrong, and you'll have to scram the reactor and fix something and then try to start it again. People are going to be able to work 18 hours at a time. So the NRC, it's just amazing. But there they are. So keep an eye on the Fermi plant. You know, if you see tremendous billowing steam coming out of the north of Toledo, you might want to just check and see if Fermi's melted down yet or not. It's not a good situation. Okay.
So we've all gone to work at some point, both tired and sick. I mean, how much confidence did you have? Say you're working 18 hours with what feels like a bad cold. How much confidence would you have that you would not make any mistakes?
Well, I have a story, Rebecca.
Yeah. Okay.
I used to be a grant writer. I was a grant writer for a number of years. And if you have ever been involved in grants, you know that the deadlines are incredibly pressure-filled. And so I had these 3 grants that were due, and I managed to get all 3 of them done. And, you know, I went all the way through them. I didn't sleep for a week and a half, basically. Well, I would work till about midnight, come home, sleep till 4 or 5, go back to work. But I got all the grants done, all the budgets were perfect, all the narratives were terrific, brilliantly written. I know that because 2 out of the 3 got funded. And then I brought the 3rd one. I went to go mail the 3rd one by the postmark, and I realized that somehow in my mind I had moved the deadline for the 3rd grant back a day.
Uh-oh.
So I had this beautiful, well-constructed, complex grant, and it was absolutely perfect, but I had missed the deadline because somewhere in my brain, it just, you know, it was obvious I couldn't actually do 3 grants of that size in that time frame. So, you know, and I would have caught it had I not been sleep deprived, had I not been exhausted from working on 3 grants at once. And so I made that one big mistake. I thought I was doing great, and I had just made a grant a day late and these things happen when you deprive people of sleep and when you overwork them. And, you know, I don't really sort of blame myself for that, but I just took it as a lesson that, hey, I'm actually not invincible.
Right.
You know, deprive me of sleep for 10 days and I will make the same mistakes as anybody else. And the same is true of nuclear plant operators. Deprive them of sleep, overwork them, and they're going to make mistakes at critical times.
No.
So shame on you, NRC. Shame on you. All right. Well, we have come to the point of the show where we get our letter from the future.
Oh, boy.
So, yes, every week, Rebecca, as you know, my great-great-granddaughter Marie I sends me a letter from the year 2300. There's this flash of photons next to my bed, and there it is. So here's this week's letter. Dear GGG, Sam and I are on a cruise ship headed for North America. It might surprise you that we still have cruise liners in the year 2300. It's true that I could have taken a dirigible and made it in a fraction of the time, but with hologram communication, there really isn't a need to travel that much anymore. So people travel for pleasure or education, and we take our time. We enjoy the journey. It might also surprise you to learn that the ship I'm traveling on is 300 years old and was used as a cruise ship back in your time. The Symphony of the Seas is still the largest cruise ship ever built. It's about 1,200 feet long and could take 10,000 people across the ocean. Of course, in your time, it was a floating ecological disaster, powered by diesel engines and dumping its sewage and trash at sea. Now it's been completely retrofitted. The electric engines are solar-powered, and the ship is completely self-contained. Nothing is dumped into the ocean. The ship even grows its own food on the journey. Right now we're docked at the floating solar island in the middle of the Atlantic. The ship's batteries can take it across the whole ocean, but for safety they like to top off at the solar energy island. Well, that's all for this week. GGG. I am still slowly recovering. I definitely have some fuzzy hair growing back on my head already. More next week. Love, Marie I.
All right.
Yeah, that's a cool letter. And, wouldn't it be nice to be on a ship and know that it had no emissions?
That would be the coolest.
It was actually clean as you're going along, and you're not hurting the environment as you're... Yeah, I often ride a ferry, out to Beaver Island in Michigan, which is leaves from Petoskey there and goes across, and it's a great ferry. I really love it, but that diesel smoke is everywhere. I mean, you're out on the deck, and you should be breathing in this really clean lake air, but instead it's always mixed with the diesel from the smokestacks, and so to be able to take a voyage without that would be just really cool. And battery technology is heading in that direction. We're almost there. All right. Well, that's what we had planned for the show. Oh, Rebecca, you had some information about some bees, some nice information about some bees in Florida.
Yep, I'd been seeing this on Facebook, so I checked it out, and they found some blue bees. That's hard to say, which they thought were extinct. Yeah, blue bees. Yeah, there were a species they thought had gone extinct. It had only been found on the south portion of the lake, something called Lake Wales Ridge in Florida, which is this eensy-weensy little endangered ecosystem. And it's just completely been almost completely swallowed up by orange groves on every side. And but they found it in some places they haven't found it before. It's actually called the calamintha, the blue calamintha, and it's kind of a iridescent navy. Actually, I saw the pictures, and it's called the calamintha because it lives mostly off of the calamint, which is a little white flower, which I think also only grows in that ecosystem. Also, interesting, because they don't live in giant hives. The individual females just build a nest, little tiny nest, lay their eggs, and take off. Basically, don't care for their offspring at all.
Interesting. Not what we normally think of as bee behavior.
Right, but it's a bee.
Or as they say, behavior. Well, that's nice. That's encouraging. Yeah.
It is.
So,
also, the city of Portland is apparently now putting water turbines inside its water pipes that the water comes through for people.
Well,
which it's kind of one of those ideas that it seems really obvious, but at the same time you're like, oh my God, how did they think of that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, most of that water will be coming from like an impounded reservoir, and often it has to fall hundreds of feet to build up the pressure that people want in their taps and things. So yeah, there's lots of energy to be tapped there. So that's cool.
And yet we never thought of it before. Crazy.
Yeah. Well, it's just one of those things, that synergy thing that you when you start looking, when you start trying, you often find that you could do it. And it's really like, for example, our solar panels, I had ordered them, and they're sitting in our garage right now. Finally found a contractor who's going to install them, and it turns out that they put into the grid at 240 volts, which is also what my van charges at.
Ooh.
So basically, I'm going to be having power going straight from my solar panels into my van, and so once again, take that, Michael Moore and Jeff.
The universe is trying to tell you something, Joe.
When you try, you find that you can do it. You can have a green future. So, asking everybody out there to try. All right, Joe DeMare
and Rebecca Wood.
We are signing off. Thanks for listening.
Bye-bye.
Nukes, run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run.